art fans to the Oblivion Gallery's first Saturday May event. Come on in. Come on in. Hi, welcome. It's pretty much standing room only, so wherever you can find a spot. There's more people. Wow, this is great.
Standing spots in the back here.
And we will definitely get more chairs. This is the biggest turnout we've had yet for one of our first Saturday events, and it's really exciting. Come on in, come on in.
Are there chairs in the office?
No, I think she appropriated all this.
Yeah, very well.
Okay. Yeah, so welcome to the first Saturday in May. Our guest artist for the next 2 months is Max Rink. So Max is a friend and fellow artist who I've admired for years, and he does really exceptional work. I mean, unless you fabricate metal, you don't have any idea like how much actual work goes into Max's work. There's an insane amount of labor and thought and detail in this stuff, and it's really exciting to have him here as our guest artist. And we asked him if he wanted to talk a little bit about his process, some of the things that get him excited in the studio, and there will be question and answer after that. So please welcome Max Rink.
Thank you, Judd. Thank you, Judd. Thank you, Renee, for this opportunity. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Those of you that I know and that I don't yet. I haven't given a public talk for 15 years, so please bear with me. Also, I delivered that new piece 12:30 yesterday afternoon. So. This is what we have. So I'm just gonna kind of break it down. I was born in Epping in 1963, small town outside of London. I grew up in England until I was 19. Influences are obviously of interest, and when I was a kid, I was out in nature all the time, parks, fields, woods, streams, you name it. Invertebrates were really big for me when I was a kid. They really spoke to me. These are 20 seconds. We're just going to keep moving right along. I hit puberty, and then the insects took a little bit of a backseat to planes, trains, and automobiles. Some of you will recognize some of these machines, but they really got under my skin. This is also part of what goes on in my mind while I'm working now. That's London after the Blitz. That's Dresden after the Allied saturation bombing later in the war. That's Gaza. And as I got older, I started to realize what the machinery was fully capable of, and to have very mixed feelings about that. On an easier note, when I was a child, these were, if I had wanted to be a painter, this is what I would have wanted to be able to paint. You'll probably recognize these. Escher on the left. I was a huge bicycle teenager. That's how I escaped from the house. And I loved the art and the craft of the bicycle. I spent a year saving up money for a second-hand one of these when I was 15 or so. I worked on bikes professionally for a lot of years, 10 years. And then I worked on cars professionally for another 5 years. I was a Jag guy. I worked on all English cars, but Jags were what really spoke to me. A lot of the aesthetics of it, and plus the mechanical reward. When I was in high school, drafting, technical drawing, descriptive geometry were some of my favorite subjects. I was never capable of hand drawing something on this level, but in terms of influence and aesthetics and where does my work come from, that's early influences. I went to community college when I was 30. I'd moved to the States in '82 when I was 19. Community college, I fell in love with math for a while, multivariable calculus and defining surfaces with numbers. I got into computer-aided drafting for the first time. And so this slide here was the first computer art project that I did back in 2002. And it combined influences from life forms, from mechanical forms, all the cars and the planes. This is me and Joe at New Zone Gallery. Steve, I called up Joe and said, you got to come and meet Max. That is as far as I got with that first project with the computer. That was all done by hand based on computer printouts because I didn't have access to laser cutters and 3D printers. Well, printers, yes, but not the laser cutting, which we'll see later. So that was a maquette for a project which basically stopped there. Is that slide stopped for some reason? Or have I just...
Video's not on, but it will be on.
Oh, sorry, technical. Yeah, sorry. So this is, I should say that I've only done this stuff full time since like 2018, but it was in the back of my mind and wanting to do it for a long time. This is work from 2002. I was in California. I was living in the country. So just personal background. I lived in a beautiful, beautiful part of California. Built myself a little cabin. Was sharing land with some other people. That's a bicycle-powered grain mill that I built for a local farm festival. I used to ride my bike all over. We moved to Eugene. This is family. I met Alex. We moved up to Eugene together. All of a sudden, I had a wife. I had a daughter. My parents moved up here. So a lot of things to take on board. All the time, the art was in the back of my mind, but it was once I had met Joe that I actually got the last 35 feet of an old chicken barn on Joe's property. That's what it looked like before I started working there. And this was my opportunity to actually have a working studio. And after I had done some reconditioning of the space, put in compressed air lines and the power and fixed the floor, built a bunch of shop furniture. I actually had a functional sculpture studio for the first time. That was a landmark at the end of 2017. That's probably the most heavily used tool in my shop on a day-to-day basis. That's where a lot of the translation from the virtual 3D modeling world to the actual real world of like hands-on metal shaping happens. And now we're going to go into a bit of process because I think people are interested in that. So this is actually a completely analog project. Here you see a sketch for the piece that's at the end of the guest space there, the initial sketch, scaling it up by hand to get a full-size template. Then from the templates that are worked up by hand, we do very traditional work for metal shaping, which is to cut out wooden forms as if you were building a house, as if you were building a boat, as if you were building an airplane. And that three-dimensional structure becomes the basis for shaping the panels that you see on the final piece. Here,
What do you mean by the word basis?
like
Is it visual basis? Are you
it's
putting on
the
that?
physical, it's the armature, if you will. It's a temporary armature that allows me to shape the sheet metal around it.
I see.
It's like a dressmaker's dummy. So you can see paper patterns that have been pulled from the form. You can see blanks behind, and then you can see the panels that have been raised. I have an air hammer that's not in that shot, that the panels are raised by hand on the air hammer. Here you see checking for conformance of the panels to the form. And you see that's the tool that I had wanted for literally decades, that table, that reference surface that lets me loft the forms. Once the half panels are all formed and they fit the form, then the welding comes in. So that's an aircraft welding torch. This is old school, mid-20th century, even earlier than that, when they were hand-building cars, hand-building planes. That's how it was done. This is a form block, so this is another way of forming the material. You can see that a metal panel is in the process of being driven into the form block to create the form. Again, all of that generated old school, analog, no computer here. You can see that tail section that was in the form block is now fitting to the final metal armature that is actually incorporated into the final piece. All of those pieces were cut out with bandsaw, jigsaw, and the pieces welded on. This is here because, apart from art, the other things that have kind of taken my time over the last couple of decades especially are activism and athleticism on the bike. This was after Trayvon Martin. That obviously was after George Floyd. So that has been something that I've been involved with as well. Bicycles, I've never let the picture, and part of having this wonderful table was I was finally actually able to build my own bike frame. So my interests do range, it's true. But you can see the influence of my bike work on my artwork, that tubular structures. So that was the bike frame I built in my new shop. That's me racing on my new bike to show it, yep, it really worked. And that was a really happy day a few years ago. And this will be the last picture of a bike you'll see in this talk. That is my favorite bicycle of all time. That's probably our most prized possession. Alex and I is an old French tandem that I restored. And it is, yeah, it's a wonderful thing. Here we're back into process now for the new piece that you see here. This is the interface for a parametric modeling software module that fits into the Rhino software that I started learning 20 years ago. Grasshopper I only started learning in 2021. It took me 4 months to get up to speed on this. But it has incredible power to be able to define shapes that would just be almost impossible to do with old school methods without a team of 10 people.
This is the software you're talking about?
This is software. Yeah, so from that initial model there, what I'm able to derive once I've chosen a geometry is I can derive these flat patterns that get cut out to make my tooling, to make blanks, which I can then bring onto the bench and start putting the tooling together and start forming the blanks. And so these are just detail shots. As here you see some tooling that's being jigged up and then getting welded together. So you take these 2D forms, all of those individual panel units that are on that piece there. This is all the work on the bench that is going into those pieces. So here you have the jig bolted rigidly to the table. Here you have a blank. The blank is going to get drawn down with heat and forging. Basically, it's forged in place over the form. Here you see one that's being forged out. So I have tooling that I'm using my handheld torch, and I'm drawing that metal down, and I'm getting that compound curve into those long, skinny reaches of the supports for that piece. And it's really pretty thrilling when you've looked at this stuff in the computer for so long, and you feel it in your mind, I know it's going to work, but until you actually have it on the bench and the metal is moving and it really is actually going where I plan to have it go, that, there's something really rewarding about that. This is just an intermediate shot where the panel blanks are all still flat, and these stars they've been bent down, but they haven't been curved over yet. There's like multiple steps. This is just a different part of things. So when you're looking at the tubular framework behind that piece, all of the bosses are pieces of tube that are being cut, and then they have a cap welded on. This is done in a rotary fixture, so where you see it tacked and then welded. When I was younger, critters were a big deal. Now that I've been in Oregon, it's the forest and the lichen and the moss and all of the plants really that catch my attention so much more and that draw me into that detail and texture. And so here we are, we're in process on this piece here. You can see this is what the panels look like before they've gotten their texture. So you have a start with a flat blank, it gets ballooned up on the hammer, and then the texturing begins. And the texture is all done by hand after the panel's been bulged up. Then basically it gets abused, not abused, but just driven back into itself. And you can see how this gives a progression through, so that all of the textures that you see are hammered in. I kind of think of it as being ferrule repoussé. If any of you know what repoussé is, it's an ancient metalworking art form for creating texture and low relief in panels. But I do it in a little wilder style than a traditional craftsperson would. To give the panels a depth, I apply a beading along the edge. That's just 1/8 inch square steel bar that gets TIG welded onto the edges of the panel, just to give them that extra weight, and also to have something. I really wanted that tie together of the outer line with the stars that are supporting the panels, to capture that geometry and have it read smoothly and not be broken. So this is what it looks like after it's been torch patinaed. So I use a heat patina. This is blue iron oxide on the surface of the panel. That's in the shade, that's in the sun.
This is the organic form that you have in there, like lichen or something? Is that your idea?
It's an influence. I wouldn't say I was trying to mimic it, but it's an influence.
It's an organic plot.
Yeah. This is a computer rendering of in light green you have a jig. The dark bronze is a form which I didn't actually produce for this piece in the end. This is more just like what I'm seeing when I'm working on the computer. So when I'm going back and forth now. At this stage in the project, I'm back and forth between the bench and the computer, like constantly. And so here you've got a piece of grasshopper, the readout, and then uploading it to a cutting service. This is jigging for a concept. You saw a couple of slides back, we had the bronze rendering of a support structure. This is the beginnings of an experiment in bringing that structure to life, which is not represented here in this show. It's just an experiment which I decided not to go forward with at this time, but it gives you an idea of different approaches that can be taken to get these shapes out of the virtual space and into the real. So what I decided to do in the end was to do the tubular structure that you'll see on the back side of that piece. The same jigs absolutely applied, and that was a really nice thing about having everything already modeled in the computer, is I could change tack, get these tubes that you see mitered by a laser tube cutting service in Utah. They shipped them back to me. I loaded up into the jig, I welded out, and because of the precision that you get in those laser miters, I didn't have to do any cold setting to the structure. and here you see it all finally coming together. It's like, to get to this point was, you just don't know until you bolt it together, right? You believe that it's going to work out. I believe that it's going to work out, but in my heart, until it's actually bolted together, I can't. And these are kind of like retrospective. I feel like kindred, like you think about artistic influences. I feel this kind of like artistic influence in reverse somehow. But Lee Bonteque.
Is she an artist?
She is not. Yes, these are all mid-20th century American sculptors, Theodore Rosnack and Harry Bertoia. And I felt when I actually found their work after I'd already been doing this series, I was like, oh, those would be kindred spirits. And also reading what they wrote about sort of their transition from like happy sculpting to like realizing that they were in a deeply troubled world with a lot of horror going on, and how that changed their work. And that's part of what drives the texture in these pieces, I have to be honest, is that, I mean, the news has been terrible for a long time, right? But especially for the last couple of years. And so I did have the news on while I'm working, right? And when I'm hammering that texture out, that emotion is going into the material, you know? So yes, there's the lichen and there's the moss, but there's also the horror of unjustified, you know, killing all around the world. Yeah, so that's kind of like the canned presentation, and I would be absolutely delighted to take any questions on any of it, or anything that comes to mind. Ruthie.
About how many hours would you say went into a piece like this?
4 years.
Best estimate on the new piece that you see there is a year's full-time work. That does include, it took me 4 months to get up. I've been doing Rhino 3D is my computer modeling software of choice for over 20 years. I started on Rhino 1.0, but it doesn't have any parametric capability, which means that to model something like that in Rhino without any scripting or programming is just ridiculously difficult. So I needed to teach myself a parametric modeling package, which conveniently plugs right into Rhino. And so it took me about 4 months to educate myself sufficiently to be able to do the work. And then if we're talking serious, 10-hour days, full-time, I would say another 8 months if you condensed it. But that piece took form over a period of 4 years because there was a lot of other stuff going on. Yeah.
There was a slide you had where you were talking about iron oxide.
Yeah.
Patina.
Yeah.
What exactly were you doing at that time with the iron oxide?
How it is. So the patina process that I'm using is called a heat patina. So if you think about what happens to the exhaust pipes on a motorbike or something like that, I don't know if you're familiar with that. You'll get that bluing, or gun bluing is done used to be done the same way. So when those panels are actually all together and the unit is finished, then I take it outside and in a safe place, I take a big weed burner and I just apply heat to it in as uniform a way as I can until the color comes up. So under the heat of the flame, the iron in the steel reacts with the oxygen in the atmosphere, and that oxide layer starts to build up. And so the hotter or longer that you get it, the thicker the layer will be. So it's a question of timing it, where you're just watching for the color change, and when it gets to the right point, shut it down. And then let that heat soak for maybe 15 seconds, something like that. I have a crock pot with melted wax in it and a brush, and then while it's still smoking hot, I brush the wax on, and that like locks everything in and also provides the extra layer of protection and another few microns of refraction, because that oxide layer is just microns thick, and the color changes depending on how, like different wavelengths of light will be preferentially refracted through it depending on how thick it is.
Is it stable? Right?
It is stable, yes.
Because of the wax treatment.
Because of the wax, and also the oxide. Yeah, the oxide itself has some resistance, but the wax is what really helps it. If you install any of these pieces outdoors, you have to make a choice about whether you want to see them slowly weather and rust, or whether you want to sort of have a regular regimen of waxing that delays that process. But as weird as it may be to have put all of thousands of hours of work into the work that you're seeing today, I am still kind of for ephemeral art, and it's up to you. Do you want to preserve it? What state do you want to preserve it in? If you should choose to, take something like this on, Yeah. Anyone else?
So even indoors, you would need to be...
Indoors, it depends on if it's a conditioned space. If you're talking about a heated, air-conditioned space, the rate of decay, even if you did nothing, would be extremely slow. Depending on variations in humidity or atmospheric compounds, you might get some spots popping here and there. But if you kept it oiled and waxed the way most museum pieces are, you could maintain it indefinitely indoors.
What kind of oils and waxes would you use?
What I actually use when I'm maintaining these pieces is lanolin. It's an old metal preservative from way back. They used it in construction, and you have something that you don't want to rust out, you fill it with lanolin. So that's what I've been using, because it's really easy, like physically. There's no solvents in it, and it wipes on and off really easily. Waxes typically would usually have a solvent base, but unfortunately Johnson's paste wax isn't available anymore. But there are wax treatments. There's plenty of waxes out there. Some more natural than others.
Do you do commissions, museum work, gallery work? What is your objective?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I was fortunate that I've had the means in the last few years to be able to just do this work and to choose this mode of expression. I've had a lot of people that are like, "Oh, you need to do public art, or this should be in a museum," but I don't have those contacts, and to this point, I haven't actually made that decision. Okay, I'm going to chase this and try and get this into the venues that people are suggesting to me that they should be in.
So you have a gallery space in your workshop?
I don't. I just have the 800 square foot workshop.
And that for display of your work?
Not for perm. No. So I've been doing shows. I've been doing shows with the Museum of Techno Art most recently. So Steve's around here somewhere. Steve Laricha. So Steve and Joe.
And you have a show coming up?
Yeah, we have a show. They're going to have a show coming up in June at the Emerald Art Center. So I have been showing around with the MTA. And I've had a couple of shows before that. I do both, right? Some of this stuff is like actually gets mathematically kind of intense. But when it comes to the bases, no, it's like when you've been doing metal work for mechanics and metal work all your life, then you're like, you know what the base needs to look like, pretty much.
On the end, balance so beautifully the like graphene roly-poly. So I was wondering if that was mathematically calculated before you built it, or if it was.
No, the bases have always been that thing when I finally get a deadline, and I'm like, so those are deadline-driven bases that are like, this is, and also just a little bit of background. I use fresh material, just mill stock. I don't use like found objects or used parts. But on all three of these bases, it just so happened that Joe has like 2 pallets worth of these plasma cut steel drops. And so when I was fishing around for how the hell am I going to get a base under those 2 pieces in the back tomorrow, it was like, okay, can I have some of those, and let's get that together tonight, so yeah. So I have the full range of experiences, like years long, lead times coupled with like, you do it now, yeah.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that. Especially when now you say that juxtaposition of more approximate base, but the question that was forming in me was more about, like, okay, it takes so long to go through all the steps of the process to create a piece this way, right? And so I'm really curious, like, I don't even quite have the question articulated, but it's like, you have to really want to do that thing and have a really clear vision, even if some of it changes along the way, to be like, yes, this is worth committing and sinking this amount of life energy into this particular expression.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about something about that. It's like, what makes you say this is the next one? It's going to look like this. What makes you commit to a form? I guess is kind of
so many factors, right? Like, it really, like. I'm just gonna free form off of this, right? So like AI has been this big thing, right? Like AI in art and like generative AI, and right, I was gonna put all of the artists out of work. And like and to be clear, I'm not actually a fan of generative AI, not the way it's being used right now. It has potential, but it's just being so abused. And so I'm like, that thing of like the AI is like scraping the entire virtual world, right? And as an artist, I feel like in my life I've been scraping the real world, like art and science and physics, chemistry, biology, then the mechanics and all the hands-on stuff. The radio telescope that my uncle and his buddy took me on a terrifying motorcycle trip to visit when I was a kid. Like on and on, like seeing the blackbird land at the Farnborough Air Show, like it's all seared in there. And then all of the bugs, all of the plants, and all of the emotion. And that's it's kind of a mystery. It condensed to that, after all the activism around police violence had petered out in 2021. It's like, what do I do now? That's what came into my mind, and it's like, how am I going to do it? I've got to learn this thing and do it, and that's part of the drive. Like that's part of the satisfaction of the work. Is like learning, like being aware of a technique, and then like, okay, now it's time to pull it in. Now I have to make the investment, because then I can do this thing, and I do have a lot of conflict, I mean, I haven't worked full time on this. There was a 2-year stretch. I met Joe maybe 2015, 2016. He invited me to come out and have a workspace at his place. My dad was going through his last years at that time. I had family, like my stepdad is also an influence, like amazing world-class molecular biologist, biochemist, that's another influence. So all those other things going on in life. So I did a two-year hard stretch, 2018 to 2020, just full-time. That was the first 5 pieces. That piece started in 2021, did 4.5 months to get the thing in the computer, and then more life stuff. And then in the ice storm at the beginning of last year was when I was like, okay, now I gotta actually produce it. Yeah.
Do you do one at a time, or do you have several things going on at once to keep you interested?
Generally one at a time. It's part of the reason why I like to work, why I've liked working in this style, is because there are so many different components and so many different techniques in play that kind of provides the working interest. I mean, sometimes it's just like it's weeks or months of just grind this thing out, you know, but there's a lot of interest in general. I would say up to this point, you know, when I've like burnt out on the art, to whatever extent I sometimes burn out on it, well, I'll build a bike, you know, or restore a tandem, you know. That's been the kind of diversion. And it's true, sometimes taking that break is essential for me. Like, there have been times when I've had 2, 3 things going on at the same time, but not often, not often. And yeah, so, you know, the best advice I ever heard is like you've got to make your art, you know, with your process. So it's easy for me to come up with all sorts of things that I don't do or can't do or wish I could do better, but I just, at least I'm old enough now to just do my art, do my process, and let it evolve. Oh, hi. Hey, Rob.
Returning to your finishes, when
Yeah.
you talk about oils and waxes,
Yeah.
are you rejecting out of hand the various petrochemical products that other steel working artists might use?
No. I mean, that Johnson's paste wax is pretty petrochemical product. But for maintenance, once that's been done, I really like the lanolin. Like, I don't need to put myself through a hot wax job, you know, every time I want to, you know, get some protection on the finish. Yeah. But no, I think less pollution is definitely better, and less chemical exposure is definitely better. Protect yourself if you're using those heavy finishes. You know, wear a respirator, it's important. Yeah, it builds up.
What's next?
What's next? Good question. I think what's next, so what you're seeing with that new piece there is actually is just the front end of a larger conceptual piece. And so I have to decide, now that that's together, whether to pursue that vision or to take a break from that and do some smaller scale pieces. Last summer, Alex and I went out and did iron smelting 2-week workshop with some really great people out in Montana. So we like dialed it all the way back to like making iron out of rocks. We built a furnace out of clay. We made charcoal with local wood. We used rock that came from Utah, and we made these blooms of iron, you know, using prehistoric, pre-industrial techniques. So I'm drawn to that as well, and doing maybe smaller scale pieces with that, but heavily wrought. As you might guess, with a lot of texture and a lot of relief, and just I do find metalworking is a great way to express myself.
Okay, thank you so much, man.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you.